So they just kind of give up and they just kind of accept what they're being told. And this problem is worse than ever. That's what school has produced. People just drift from, one authority to another.
Hey friends, thanks so much for tuning in. I very much appreciate your support. In lieu of Google's strategy to completely shut off advertising to the alt media, which more and more is starting to feel like blatant discrimination, even more than censorship, and I'd have to believe that is a crime on some level. Your support matters now more than ever, and a special thank you to my patrons over at Patreon, the less than 1% that have stepped up. And you're really making a big difference for me and my team at SGT Report. And today we have a new guest on. His name is Brett Venat, and I've never spoken with him before, but we have a lot of cross-pollination subjects, lots to talk about between us. He has a podcast called School Sucks, and the website is schoolsucksproject.com. And boy, do we have a lot to talk about because public schooling really does suck. Brett, how are you?
I'm doing great, Sean. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. I just want to start with a anecdote, and it's a sad one for sure. There has been a spat of suicides in our area of young people, most of whom attend public schools, who I think are feeling very disconnected and very eaten up by a culture that is hell-bent on not teaching them about God and not teaching them about spirituality and really separating them from those things. And it just breaks my heart because just recently, within the past week, a 14-year-old young man in our area killed himself. And his parents are doctors, and he has a loving family, and there's just no reason for it. I think more and more children, more and more teenagers are feeling disconnected as they drown in these public schools. I mean, I got to tell you, if you're not in sports, if you're not a jock, if you're not really one of these popular kids, it's real easy to get lost in these giant public high schools. Brett, where would you like to begin as it pertains to how badly public schools suck? Because I think they suck on purpose. I think it's been rolled out by design. The work of John Taylor Gatto we can talk about because...
Oh, sure.
Yeah, I mean, he turned me on to the fact that these are indoctrination camps, and they're doing a very, very good job at creating worker zombies instead of critical thinkers.
Absolutely. And just to your comment about the suicide, it's really unfortunate. I worked for a long time as a teacher, and then around 2006, I took a job outside Boston tutoring the sort of upper crust overachiever types in those really competitive school districts there. And the first in-home client I ever had, I was meeting with her just days after one of her best friends had committed suicide as a result of, I think in that environment, it had a lot to do with the pressure of preparation for college. Outside, of course, there's no personal education. There's no self-knowledge, self-growth education, taking place in that system at all. And there's a number of reasons that we can get into. But, I was just thinking about the things not being taught. And I'm not particularly religious myself, but I've realized the real importance of an alliance of all of these groups, whether they're conservatives, libertarians, Christians, against the progressive far left agenda that takes place in the schools, because there seems to be this dichotomy that's becoming increasingly apparent between the ways left and right. And I would put, in this case, like libertarians more on the right side of that, go about improving society. For libertarians, for Christians, it really seems like it is a personal mission. It's about building freedom and self-actualization from the person up. It's, perfecting oneself, self-mastery. And on the other hand, especially like we're seeing in higher education right now, it's about improving society from the institution down. Right. And we see that individuals are often the casualty of that approach, which leads to these unfortunate. Now, it doesn't always go to, the extent of a suicide, but just a kind of widespread unwellness and dissatisfaction and listlessness. I think these were very, very common things that I saw in a lot of the students that I worked with over a period of a decade, even though they were supposedly at the best schools that were generating the best opportunities. So I think once in a while, something like a suicide or, a shooting, something really tragic pulls our attention to the schools momentarily. But what is disregarded and overlooked is the sort of widespread malaise and suffering that goes on there day in and day out for millions of students.
Well, that's right. And I really think it's all by design, and we can talk about Common Core. I just want to read this for folks. This comes from whatiscommoncore.wordpress.com, and it's quoting John Taylor Gatto, who said in his book, Against School, How Public Education Cripples Our Kids and Why, he called schools virtual factories of childishness, places where children are taught to be immature, passive, bored, boring, and unintellectual. Gatto quotes H.L. Mencken, who said that the aim of public schools was not to fill the young of the species with knowledge and awaken their intelligence. Nothing could be further from the truth. The aim is simply to reduce as many individuals as possible to the same safe level, to breed and train a standardized citizenry, to put down dissent and originality, end quote. And I think that's a model rolled out by the oligarchs. That's a model rolled out by the old robber barons. They want to create worker bees, not anybody that might stand up and challenge their system. And you know what? I should just add, now that people are starting to wake up and challenge their system on YouTube, in the alt media, and in other places, there's now this strategy to kill those avenues of knowledge, to kill those avenues of information, to take away our right to advertise, to make the playing field no longer level so that we cannot compete. That seems to be a systematic strategy to destroy those of us that are now challenging this system. Because that's not what they want. They just want diligent worker bees. I mean, isn't that what George Carlin told us? It's a big club, and you and I ain't in it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting that for the truth, we have to go to comedians and satirists like Carlin and H.L. Mencken. But that's where it often starts. And, just on what's become apparent really just in the last couple months, or really in the last couple weeks with Google, and maybe going back a little bit further with YouTube, reminds me there's a scene in one of those Monty Python movies where the peasant is grabbed by the king and shook when he's being disobedient and saying, now you see the violence inherent in the system. And that's what we're seeing, kind of like the final fight of these institutions to maintain their power and their control over public opinion through some really blatant attacks on free speech.
Yeah, and so they're just changing the rules of the game right in the middle of the game. And I've been
Indeed.
joking lately, if you're hungry for ads, because I'm sure everybody comes to YouTube because they want to see an ad, just remember that those ads help support the channel that makes the content that you seek. And if you're hungry for ads because you're not getting them now in the alt media, just go visit some of your favorite libtard channels. Go visit any of the liberal insanity that's out there. You'll find plenty of ads because literally they are now discriminating against us. And I can think of nothing more fascist than that. They're changing the rules in the middle of the game. I believe it's almost a Bilderberg Group level strategy. This was probably rolled out and thought about for the last year or two. That this is how they would destroy YouTube, or at least destroy the alt media that's successful out there, in an effort to try to recapture the narrative and in an effort to try to recapture the lost eyeballs.
Just in the last 2 days, we announced that we will remove advertising from anything we identify as fake news.
But you know what? I've said this. I'll say it again. One thing they cannot recapture, Brett, is the lost trust. They don't have our trust anymore. At least once you're awake, you're awake.
That's true. Absolutely true. And there's no going back. And they've kind of been added. A lot of this tech sector, Google, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. They've become this fourth branch of control. Before this, knowledge dissemination came exclusively from education. Before this rise of alternative media. And that, since its very early development in the United States as a public institution, was heavily controlled by a nexus of government, academia, and industry. So now the tech sector, through the Zuckerbergs and the Bill Gates, has definitely been co-opted into that management of the public mind.
Well, that's a very good description. They are management. Those are the middle managers, the Zuckerbergs, the Gates, the Buffetts. Sure, they're billionaires, they're multi-billionaires, but that's one generation of wealth. The people that are aligned against humanity are the multi-generational banking families, the aristocracies, the money that's been handed down. These people are interbred to keep their power. And so they're trillionaires, essentially. And this model is set up not to enlighten humanity. The model that the model they have set up is a model to keep humanity in serfdom, and they're deathly afraid of people that are waking up. That's why there's such a concerted effort to shut us all down. And they're doing it with straw mans, by the way. I'm sure you've noticed this. They're saying that the advertisers got together to boycott YouTube because some of the advertisers were appalled at finding their ads in front of objectionable content like white supremacy videos or
like PewDiePie,
anti-Semitic
yeah.
videos. A very, very thin, very, very small margin of videos. And you think YouTube couldn't just target those? No, they took down everybody. So I know it just gets me heated because it is really the perfect, it epitomizes fascism that they are doing this and they're continuing to do it as we have this conversation. And again, it's all based on a straw man, but that's what they love to do. They like to set up their straw men so they can knock them down. I mean, 9/11, completely based on a lie. And I know that that's a false flag, a day that helped you wake up, is it not?
Oh yeah, absolutely. That was like my first. I mean, I had been in college right before that happened, and I had been exposed to left-wing history through people like Chomsky and Zinn, and I got kind of a satisfaction from, oh, I know something you don't know. I've been lied to my whole life, but now I'm woke. Now I know the truth. And initially, the conspiracy mindset continued to feed, whatever kind of positive emotion or satisfaction that I was just getting from feeling like I was in on a secret. But then as my views about it became more sophisticated, it was 9/11 wound up being a really incredible teaching tool because there's an allure about conspiracy. It's exciting. It's like something you would see in a movie for whatever reason. But, when it comes to being educated, and this is where the schools really fall down. Well, I mean, you could say they fall down if their goal was really to educate people. You could say they're massively successful if their goal is to indoctrinate people. But assuming that, parents think their kids are going to be educated there, the schools fall down on motivation. There's nothing there to motivate you to actually learn. So when we find motivation for ourselves, that's when the best learning opportunities take place. So I was excited and motivated about this new world that I was being exposed to initially through people like InfoWars or Coast to Coast Radio. I mean, that was where I started, almost 15 years ago now. And it was a door opening that actually made me learn about how does U.S. intelligence work? How does U.S. foreign policy work? What is the story here with the Islamic world? Why did I never learn anything about this in secondary school or when I was studying international relations and history in college? I don't even think Islam was mentioned. So because of my curiosity and because of my motivation, whole new worlds of learning opportunities were opened up to me at that point, and that set me on a path that very slowly and with two steps forward, one step back kind of approach got me to where I am today. So yeah, I would say that was a pretty important event in my development.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's exactly what happened to me too, because once you start to learn about the real history of the world, it is so incredibly fascinating. If they taught this stuff in colleges, people would just come alive. But what they do is they make history so boring. They give you the winner's version of history, so you're really not getting the full picture. And this goes right on up to the PhD level. And I think that's something that happened to you in particular, is it not? I think actually I was listening to an interview that you did with Jay Dyer, and maybe his experience was that went right up to the PhD level, and it was at that point he got fed up. But this goes to the highest echelons of power, and that's why we can be living in very nice neighborhoods amongst doctors and lawyers and successful people raising nice kids that are completely asleep. They don't
absolutely.
They don't know the real history of the world.
Well, no, I mean, what we have today, what the schools have produced, you can see some patterns, and I don't want to apply them, recklessly to all people. There's an addiction to novelty. There's an indifference to everything except a paycheck at the end of the week. There's hyperconsumption as a form of therapy, listlessness, purposelessness, helplessness when it comes to matters of finance or self-care. My father makes a living explaining people's own healthcare to them because they can't understand it to themselves they can't understand it themselves as like a consultant. And, we have also a kind of functional literacy, right? People can know that the sign at the end of the road says stop and therefore they should stop when they get to it, but they're not going to go and read, Critique of Pure Reason by Immanuel Kant. I mean, I'm one of the biggest critics of school there is, and I'm probably not going to read Critique of Pure Reason. But I like to think of my, literacy skills above basic functionality. But yeah, I mean, if you think about one of those attributes that I just named, indifference to everything but a paycheck. I've had conversations with people about the problems that probably a lot of the things that you talk about on your show, but also just the school problem generally. And people throw up their hands and they say, what do you want me to do? I have 2 kids. I have a mortgage. And this is kind of where I'm at. I'm trying to survive with these responsibilities. That's quaint that you can take on additional concerns and considerations and devote some of your time, but that's not the real world, man. And that problem, that trap that people are in, where they have to suppress their own curiosity about what's going on in the world around them, that through a boiling frog approach is ultimately going to affect them. Now that's gone on steroids with this student debt thing, because now people don't just have the car payment and the mortgage anymore. They have $100,000 hanging over their head. And if they want to buy the better house and they want to get the new car every 4 years, they better be at the office, whether they hate their job or not, at 8 a.m. Monday through Friday, and all these other concerns that you and I apparently have the luxury to talk about, that's child's play to them because they've got bills to pay and a credit rating to maintain.
Yeah, that's right. And they're slaves to the banks. So again, who's the winner in this model? The bankers.
Right.
Every
Exactly.
single time it's the bankers. And you'll notice that this criminal government is in bed with the bankers by agreeing with the bankers that that's the one loan now that apparently will follow you to your grave. You cannot escape your student debt. So if you're one of these poor kids that does not understand that you're going to have to pay this money back, that does not understand that it can't be forgiven through a bankruptcy, a personal bankruptcy, that does not understand that this debt, this noose, this lead weight around your neck is going to follow you around until you pay it back or you're dead, it's insane. And so you're right. They're absolutely slaves to the system through debt. And it's just absolutely appalling. So I want to ask you a couple things about Common Core, No Child Left Behind, the Prussian socialist model of education. But
Absolutely.
I want your thoughts on that first. I mean, the bankers always seem to win, don't they?
They do, or that level of the establishment. I was thinking about how to talk about the history, the dark history of public school in a way that doesn't sound sort of easy to dismiss or abstract or too reductive, too like good and evil. I think that people can brush off those kinds of stories, those kinds of narratives very easily as conspiracies. Like there was this, plan of all these people, they got together like Jekyll Island style, and they set up this system to control everybody and indoctrinate everybody.
But let me jump in and say,
Sure.
But it did happen.
It did happen,
the
yeah.
Federal Reserve model, meeting on Jekyll Island in private to set up this noose around the people's neck of the United States by usurping their monetary authority, their constitutional right to honest money, to give themselves, these bankers, the authority to print money out of thin air, right? To ensnare our nation in endless debt, to buy up everything with the fiat dollars they create out of thin air. That's a fact. That's not a conspiracy theory. It's a real conspiracy.
Oh, absolutely. I totally agree with what you're saying. And I think I referenced Jekyll Island because I don't want to apply a simple story to the schools when it's a very, very complex progression of agendas. And when I try to explain this to people today, I really try to get detailed so they can understand that I'm not just, people don't want to believe this stuff. They don't want to deal with this stuff. So they'll dismiss you as paranoid or, you're searching for monsters where there aren't any. But there is a real history here. There's a progression through 4 phases of using the schools for some kind of larger social engineering or scientific management purpose. And I'll just tell all 4 briefly, and then you mentioned a couple things that you want to talk about, so we can go down those paths if you want, because they're all part of these 4 phases. The first phase, the Horace Mann brings the Prussian schools to America, is homogenization. It's about basically standardizing the public, producing, predictable people. So that's like the latter half of the 19th century. The second phase is socialization, and the word socialize or socialism is in there for a reason. This is the progressive John Dewey phase, where it's about what he called the new individualism. That the problem in America is that everybody thinks of themselves as an individual, and they need to understand that they're part of a society. So that starts at the beginning of the 20th century and runs through the 1930s. The third phase, which goes from the 30s about until the 1970s, is outright psychological experimentation. And where they start talking about, well, what if we put kids on drugs, and how can we get these outcomes in attitudes by shaping the curriculum in a certain way? Like, let's use the school as a scientific management laboratory. And the fourth phase, the one that I think that we're still in to some extent, is globalization, which is basically not just asking people. I mean, dismissing individualism at this point is old news. Now it's even dismissing any kind of national identity to be a global citizen.
Right.
That's the idea. So in this, your most recent video, last time I checked your YouTube channel, was something like, if Trump does this, it's over. And it was about him doing a 180 on climate change, right? This is huge in the schools. The Agenda 21, which I'm sure you've talked about plenty, and sustainable development is what they call it. Indoctrinating people to accept the ideas of this, UNESCO sustainable development project is been a part of the curriculum for at least the last 20 years. And there's a really effective critic named Michael Chapman. He's from an organization called EdWatch, and he's given a bunch of talks about this, where he actually goes and he reads out of teachers' guides for history and civics textbooks. And he talked about, there's this one lesson in the book, and this is under the guise of critical thinking, where students are invited to propose a law. What do you think, student, would be a good law? And then in the teacher's guide, it says, suggest something that has to do with the environment. And then it starts this line of indoctrination about sustainable development and environmentalism. And this is taking place in this book during a lesson about, guess what? The Bill of Rights. Kids are getting UN propaganda while they're supposed to be learning about the Bill of Rights. So that environmentalist, internationalist phase is still pretty much where we are. But combined with that is the Common Core curriculum that you mentioned, which is really about refitting the American public to perform placidly and efficiently in a service economy, which is where most jobs are and which most jobs are going to be.
Well, that's interesting because you're the expert here. So, and I do want to talk to you about Common Core, which I believe was rolled out by the UN, correct? Did it trickle down from the UN?
Well, I think a lot of the UNESCO aspects of it, the Sustainable Development Agenda 21 material that's in Common Core, originated whenever the Agenda 21 paper was originally written, I think in 2002. It's funny that even after 100 years of this schooling, people are still worried that Americans are too free-minded and they're too individualistic. And basically what it says, I think it's like chapter 35 or 36 of Agenda 21, it talks about the education aspect of this. And the concern is that, these Americans who have like self-respect and individual identity, they're never going to subsume themselves to like global citizenship voluntarily. So this has to be built into the school curriculum, and it has to come at a very early age. So yes, in that sense, UN environmentalism has been a part of not just Common Core, but also its forerunner, No Child Left Behind.
Okay, well, that's why this video that I just made the other day was so important. If Trump does this, it's game over, because really, when he was running, and all I was doing as really a journalist or a reporter in the alt media was telling the folks and playing clips of the wonderful things he said that resonated with me as a libertarian and a free-minded person.
Sure.
And then wonderful things he said he would do. And so if he kept his end of the bargain, electing him seemed like a pretty good deal compared to Hillary Clinton, who was definitely in the pocket of, well, all sorts of nefarious folks on the planet, including Goldman Sachs and the Rothschilds themselves. So My point on Trump was that if he puts an end to Common Core, which he talked about, if he gets us out of these Agenda 2030 deals, if he gets us out of the Paris Accord, the climate change deal, if he does these things that he said he would do, we're going to be in much, much better shape. And so the real problem here is that UN Agenda 21, which has now really been rebranded as UN Agenda 2030,
Right.
is going to turn us all into serfs in the name of saving the planet. And so what they are doing with this indoctrination in the public schools, and by the way, the media has been weaponized. So we see these same messages carried out to moms and dads who watch CNN.
Mm-hmm.
They are going to save the planet by convincing us, formerly free people, that we cannot use fossil fuels anymore to heat our homes, to drive our cars, to do any of the things that we like to do, to recreate. First of all, the UN Agenda 2030 deal, they don't even want us to have single-family homes. They want to herd us into big, giant hellholes, think Mexico City on steroids, and they just want a dutiful, non-questioning public. Sheeple. That's what they want. And UN Agenda 2030, if Trump reverses his stance here on the Paris Accord, if he reverses his stance, if he comes out and says now global warming is a problem, if he does a 180 on these things, it truly is game over. Because if they take away our right, if they take away the energies that we have had access to and have used for the last 150 years without giving us new viable energies, and I'm not talking about windmills or solar, that's not going to cut it.
Right.
If they don't give us new technologies to replace the old ones, they're going to turn us back into 17th century serfs, which is exactly what they want.
Yeah, very tall apartment buildings along train tracks. I did a show years ago. It was I think it was called "No Child Left Behind" and Other Bipartisan Educational Conspiracies, and we talked about how all of these ideas. I mean, because like once you get people to buy into the kind of environmental religion, the solutions that would seem really unappealing at first. If you get that buy-in from the public, then you can again work with the boiling frog approach to get to a really horrific outcome. It's just amazing that imagine, even though this is impossible, that there was some kind of global organization that had these environmental concerns right after the American Revolution. This would be insane to think that you could ever get Americans to subject themselves to something like this. But after 100 years of one form of indoctrination after another, homogenize, make people the same, socialize, get people to buy into collectivism, experiment on them psychologically to make sure that they have the right attitudes coming out of school, test for those attitudes. Then you can push this idea of you are effectively meaningless on the scale of the whole world. And, you should you should devote your life to being a steward of the environment as we direct you to do so.
Right.
And it's total control. I mean, and like these people care about the environment anyway. Governments are the worst polluters in the world.
Well, that's right. Well, in that video I did too, we cite the Club of Rome as being the mechanism or the think tank which came up with this idea that we need to get the world to band together in the name of combating global warming. Okay, they came up with that in the late 60s, early 70s.
Ladies and gentlemen, the origins of the environmental movement as we see it began back in 1968. When the Club of Rome was formed. The Club of Rome has been described as a crisis think tank, which specialises in crisis creation. The main purpose of this think tank was to formulate a crisis that would unite the world and condition us to the idea of global solutions to local problems. In a document called The First Global Revolution, authored by Alexander King and Bertrand Schneider, on pages 104 and 105, it stated, "In searching for a new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine and the like would fit the bill. All these dangers, of course, will be caused by human intervention that will require a global response."
The thing is that what we've talked about here and what we're demonstrating is that these people, these controllers, these elite, the people at the very tippy top of the pyramid, are very smart and they play the long game. They've been rolling this out for generations. And now they're starting to get the result they want. They're starting to get, well, maybe they're not, though. Maybe they're not getting exactly what they want. And maybe now they really are a little bit in a panic because of Brexit, because of Trump getting elected, because people want liberty, right? That's the only reason Trump got elected, is because people in this country, those that voted for him, didn't want more Clinton tyranny, fascism, corporatocracy. They wanted what Trump was promising, which I think, for lack of a better word, was liberty compared to what Clinton was promising. So the problem is, it's starting to appear like we're not going to get it. It's starting to appear as though the deep state and those that have played this long game for generations, they have us by the neck. They have humanity by the neck. And, if you don't like the Orwellian vision of the boot stomping on the face of humanity forever, too bad. You're going to get it, because they have the guns, the weapons. They have the Pentagon. They control Skynet. They control it all. I mean, I hate to be so bleak, but honestly, if Trump flip-flops on the rest of this stuff, we're screwed.
Well, yeah, I think that the foreign policy flip-flop was a real shock for a lot of people, including myself. Like, I was not very supportive of Donald Trump during the campaign. Certainly wasn't supportive of Clinton either. I saw, Trump as obviously, I think it goes without saying that I would prefer him as president over her. But I had a lot of skepticism about Donald Trump, and I really did hope that he would stick to his guns on U.S. foreign policy, especially in the Middle East. And what we've seen in the last couple of weeks suggests that, there's lots of theories, and I know there's these Trump defenders who, every time he does something that sort of goes against what he said he was going to do or makes him look stupid, they add like another dimension to this chess game that he's playing. So now we're at like 6D chess Donald Trump is playing, and I'm not necessarily. I think it seems like the neoconservatives who are in his administration and the neoconservatives, which is a left-wing thing. Conservative is a misnomer. These people are Trotskyites. They've been very effective since the 1970s at basically infecting administrations where the president was in some ways weak on, general intellectual matters and certainly on foreign policy matters. It was the case with Gerald Ford, with Ronald Reagan, with George W. Bush. In 2012, these people had their fingers crossed for Sarah Palin. So now this is a nice outcome that they have with Donald Trump, who doesn't know much about U.S. foreign policy and is probably, because of who has his ear, like his daughter and his daughter's husband. Yep. He could be pushed in what he believes is a more humanitarian direction, which is what the neoconservatives like to use to basically enforce a progressive agenda on a global scale. Nation building is the same impulses that, the most meddling progressives had in the United States for the United States all throughout the 20th century. So it's just this kind of sick left-wing thinking now projected to the entire globe.
Well, that's right. And what's so disturbing about this flip-flop here geopolitically, he said that meddling in Syria was a bad idea. He scolded Obama for doing it when he was running for president. So for him to quickly flip-flop and launch 59 Tomahawk missiles at Syria based on what is so clearly a false flag of some sort, this gas attack, which Assad had no interest and no benefit in pulling off against his own people.
Right.
And people on the left and the right are recognizing that. Nation states around the world, leaders, Putin, everybody is saying that this is ridiculous. It was probably the white helmets responsible for this. It was probably the Pentagon-backed ISIS fighters, the rebels, that did this as a way to frame Assad, because there's just no reason for Assad to have done this, and how could Trump not know that? So you have to intellectually ask yourself, either he is just the world's biggest sucker, or he knows damn well that it was a false flag, and the deep state got to him, the neocons got to him, the Kushners, the Israeli lobby. He pledged his love for Israel and Bibi Netanyahu when he was running. We all knew that, but we're still hoping for the best. And it just looks like more war for Israel, more lost treasure for those of us that call ourselves Americans.
Yeah, what's really astonishing to me about this current phenomenon is the media's treatment of questions about this. Like everything you said is true. It would be ridiculous for Assad to have done this, right? And there's a litany of reasons why. And there was one congressman, I don't remember his name, but he was interviewed. This was a clip that circulated last week where the CNN anchor acts so stunned by his suggestions that, like, okay, maybe it was the Syrian Air Force and maybe they dropped a bomb that hit a chemical weapons dump, and that's how the gas got released, right? Which is not the official story, but it's certainly a very plausible, and I would say as far as like, paranoid conspiracies go, it's kind of benign. It's not really that controversial. It's certainly a possibility.
Yeah.
And this
It's probably not what happened. It probably really was a false flag, but here he's saying, he's in a way just slightly giving defense to Assad, and I'm sure CNN was appalled.
Right. He's kind of finding some middle ground between the official story
Right.
and the false flag approach, and just the outrage that the CNN reporter evidences for even suggesting an alternative theory besides the completely on its face implausible official explanation. And this is after 15 years of this, going back to 9/11,
Right.
but then, everything to do with the Iraq War. Anytime somebody wanted to present an alternative narrative, they were a kook. And the fact that that is still where the mainstream media is just amazing to me.
Yeah, no, it's amazing to me too, because it is literally like living in some sort of prison camp in this country, that the
Right.
mainstream media gets to roll out these narratives and stick with them. It's a little bit like if you came home and you caught your wife cheating with a man in your bed, and she somehow convinced you that you didn't really see that, and you just as long as she keeps saying that really wasn't a man in my bed, that guy that ran out the front of the house, that's not what happened. Let me recap. I was in bed, yes. That was not a man in my bed. I was not cheating on you. I would never do that. Now listen, here's the official story. And they just keep jamming it down our throats, no matter how ridiculous it is. And
Yeah.
that can only work in a very sick society.
Yeah, absolutely.
And maybe our society's not quite that sick, because you remember when Obama was pushing to bomb Syria, people were outraged and he couldn't really get away with it. And so now they gave us Trump and they did it anyway. And the mainstream media, CNN in particular, I think has abysmal ratings, maybe the lowest that they've ever had. So maybe our society isn't that sick. It's just the problem is that the corporations that emanate our information, the 6 or 7 major corporations that give us 90% of our news, they've got all the money. So they can pay these talking heads $10, $12, $14 million a year to spew lies all day, and they get the pharmaceutical ads to pay for it all. So
Absolutely.
it literally is the tip that the head of the pyramid controls the narrative, and the narrative is rolled out every single day by the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, CNN, MSNBC, even Fox News. They're all in on it. These are State Department talking points. So we're no longer a free people getting real news.
Well, I absolutely agree. And, you're talking about the sickness of society, and it reminds me, earlier today, I was just going through your recent content on YouTube, and I'm thinking to myself in preparation for this discussion, schooling is what makes so many of these horrors possible. And regardless of all of the different interests that have converged on the school project over the last 150 years in this country, or regardless of the different phases that the schooling has gone through as a tool of control that I mentioned earlier, 3 lessons, like 3 hidden lessons of school, really continue to come through. And I would say that number 1 is obedience, which is basically, it's not always so overt, the obedience, do what I say or else. Like you might only hear that, 5 or 10 times your whole school life. But it's steady and subtle throughout the whole school experience, and people leave that environment very obedient.
Yeah, well,
The second lesson,
in these high schools now too.
what's that?
They have police in the high schools.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. The second lesson is conformity, and that's part of the Dewey socialization lesson. And, obedience and conformity, well, that mindset doesn't really produce a lot of individuality, curiosity, self-efficacy. So they kind of force a third lesson, which is political, intellectual, philosophical, even spiritual apathy, right? That people just don't really care about anything. So they're kind of like, you know, sailboats with with nobody at the helm, right? They just kind of drift where the winds of power take them.
That's right.
Right? They have this apathy. They don't even have the tools to dig in and try and discern the truth for themselves about so many of the things that are being thrust at them every day. So they just kind of give up and they just kind of accept what they're being told. And this problem, I want to be an optimist, but this problem is worse than ever because of the way people interface with information today. You look at your YouTube homepage, like when you open YouTube and it has all these suggested videos. So mine has every channel I'm subscribed to and all these different things that are going on. You look at the Twitter feed, you look at the Facebook news feed, and these people who've been schooled independence, they're given this massive horizontal view of the world. This great breadth of all of this information, all of this stuff going on. And the result is that they're overwhelmed by it because they don't have the time or the tools to get vertical, to go deep into all of those things. So they're just left with this information overload, which is very, very disempowering. And they have to go in search for someone to trust. And a lot of times, even if a person has an experience where they say, oh, I don't trust that person anymore. So this term fake news is being thrown around. It's not like someone will say, oh, I've fallen for fake news. So what I'm going to do is put myself through a rigorous course of, logical fallacies and how to build arguments and how to deconstruct arguments. They're going to go find, a new authority. More often than not, instead of teaching themselves those skills, because I don't blame people for that, and I'm not putting people down for that. That's what school has produced. People just drift from one authority to another, and I think that's really, really unfortunate, and that's a problem that real education could address if people found out what it was and how to attain it for themselves.
Yeah. No, I think you're 100% right. And, when I was waking up and probably when you were waking up, it was a full-time job. And I had kids and I had a full-time job.
Right.
I had a career at Target Corporation in the marketing department. And I was in the process of going through a very painful awakening because of 9/11. And literally there were, night after night after night. Literally there was night after night after night of, 2 a.m., researching and digging and trying to find the truth and trying to figure out all of this stuff that we're now talking about, which fortunately is becoming more and more common. People are waking up to the deep state and to the apparatus that has really controlled society from behind the scenes for decades and decades, in fact, centuries. And I just want to round out the conversation with this. You mentioned spiritual apathy, which I think is spot on. And early on in my notes in our conversation, I had jotted down this title of a video I did, an interview with James Perloff called "The Elite Don't Want You to Know That God is Real." And basically, I wanted to bring that up to you, and I was waiting for the right time. You mentioned spiritual apathy. These kids have been removed from any idea of a creator, the kids in public schools. And, we can debate whether or not God is real, but I can tell you this. The elite don't want kids to think God is real. They want kids to think that everything happened by accident. And I believe that the Big Bang is just as big a leap of faith as believing God spoke the universe into reality. And that's pretty much all they teach now in public schools is Darwinism, the Big Bang. And James Perloff and I, in that conversation, we deconstruct Darwinism because of two wonderful books he wrote on the subject. So if you guys want to listen to a fascinating conversation, check out The Elite Don't Want You to Know That God is Real. Because the public schools don't want kids thinking about that either. Because if kids in public schools grow up believing they just came about by an accident and everything in this universe is random and nothing has any meaning, then I guess they're more apt to become sociopaths. They're more apt to become little slaves to a system that is more than willing to chew them up and spit them out.
Well, it kind of leaves them, I think, with a deterministic mindset. And I think that it's interesting that a lot of the popular atheists now attack the idea of free will because they immediately tie it to religious doctrine. And therefore, we have to establish that the universe is deterministic to fight against the free will argument. So I would have to watch that video, and I'd be happy to talk to you about it at some point in the future. Like I said, I'm not a religious person, but the alliance that I've realized over the last couple of years is an important one, because when you see people, I mean, there's reasons why people wouldn't be religious. Maybe they've never had that convincing experience, or maybe they had a bad experience with, some kind of religion that was imposed on them at a very young age. But when you see a lot of people on the left trying to undermine religion or undermine faith, that makes me, even as a non-religious person, very, very suspicious, which is why I said I feel a stronger alliance to people of faith, because they see that as a competitor. They see this idea that faith creates communities, that faith can strengthen families, and they say, well, that's no. We're God. The state is God. That's always been the idea. And, Marx said, destroy the family, destroy religion, destroy property, destroy the state. That was part of the plan, because religion, I mean, the word itself, in words like ligament or obligation, is a kind of binding. It holds people together, it holds families together, or it historically has. And if my suspicion started to become more apparent when I saw people trying to destroy that. I said, why? Because they want to be like scientifically enlightened? No, it's because they want control, and they see faith as a competitor to that control.
Well, I think you're spot on, and we can talk in another conversation sometime about spiritual warfare, which is what I think at the end of the day this is all leading up to, which is why we cover Pedogate and Pizzagate and all of this other stuff. But do check out that video if you get the chance. The elite don't want you to know that God is real, because at the end of the day, Perloff does a great job deconstructing Darwinism with fact. Fact that we now know that maybe folks didn't know 150, 200 years ago. And it all leads us back to spiritual warfare. These folks at the top of the pyramid do seem to worship a dark power. They seem to believe in a negative spirituality that they believe they get great power from, which is why many of them are into abusing children and trafficking in children. And I do find it interesting that although they don't want God spoken about in the schools, the mainstream media is more than happy to give us shows like 666 Park Avenue and Lucifer on Fox, and the Santa Clarita Diet, which is about cannibalism, starring Drew Barrymore. I mean,
right.
The negativity in the mainstream is perfectly acceptable. Just keep God out of the conversation, Brett.
Yeah, absolutely. So I will definitely check that out. I love a good challenge, and I would be happy to come back and talk to you anytime. I really enjoyed the conversation. Can I just point your listeners in a couple of directions before I go?
Absolutely.
We talked a lot about these phases of school, and we mentioned Gatto a couple of times. I made what turned out to be a documentary length presentation about Gatto's work in his book, The Underground History of American Education. And it's right at the top of my webpage at schoolsucksproject.com. You'll see there's just a little banner at the top, and people can watch that playlist. It's a series of vignettes that come from that book that cover pretty much in detail, even though the whole thing is only 80 minutes and most of the individual videos are like 5 to 10 minutes. It covers all four of these phases. It covers the Prussians, the progressives, the scientific management, the psychological experimentation, and it's a really, really good primer on developing a more detailed history of public school. And I hope if people do watch those, they'll subscribe so we can get more visibility, not just for us, but also for Mr. Gatto himself, who watched the videos and signed off on them and was, happy they were created.
Absolutely. And people can check you out directly at schoolsucksproject.com. And tell people about the podcast. How do they find the podcast?
The podcast, you could find it on any podcatcher or on iTunes. It's just School Sucks Podcast. We do 1 or 2 shows a week, and we talk a lot about something that we only touched on today, which is what real education is. So we talk about, media literacy, We talk about how students can defend themselves from some of the toxic messages in higher education. We talk about things like productivity, self-mastery, critical thinking, spotting logical fallacies. So yeah, School Sucks is the title, and that was a pretty open and shut case to make on the show in the early days. And now we talk about what I consider to be the opposite of school, which is education. So if people, are home educators or just adults interested in, self-education, then schoolsucksproject.com is a great resource. The site is very searchable. There's a new Start Here page where you can kind of get an overview of everything that we do. But subscribe to the podcast, check out an episode or two, and I'd be happy to receive feedback from anyone in the audience or questions.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much, Brett. I really do appreciate your time. And I want to give a shout out to, is it Michael at Server Farm that I believe got us connected?
Yeah, Mike at Silver Farm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I appreciate Mike. He does good work over there, and I'm glad he got us connected with each other. Guys, our guest has been Brett Venat, schoolsucksproject.com. Check it out. Brett, thanks so much.
Thank you.
And guys, thank you so much for your support. You know how much it means to us, especially in these dire times when we're under attack by Google. Thanks so much for checking us out on Patreon. And thanks for visiting sgtreport.com for real news, the antidote to corporate propaganda, 24/7. Have a terrific week ahead, guys. God bless. Bye-bye.
It's a game, it's a con. Most importantly, it's a fraud. But yet this is still the system that passes for a pricing scheme for gold and silver.